All right, for today's video review, we're going to be taking a look at Transformers Generations Reveal the Shield Wreck-Gar. A pretty fun figure, honestly. This is a toy that I think gets way more flack than it's due. I've always really liked this guy, but he's pretty widely panned by the community at large, and I don't totally understand why. I mean, I do understand some of it, but yeah, no, he's a pretty fun figure. Now, during the this period in the Generations line, they were trying to give like more realistic alt modes. So rather than the kind of like spacey motorcycle that he originally turned into, he does turn into a more of like a an Earth style like dirt bike, and I think it's a pretty good looking alt mode, all things considered. Like, yeah, you can kind of tell that this chunk is the body down here, but I think that it generally gets the right shape across there. It's got some good details. He does roll pretty nicely. Obviously, he'll fall over being a motorcycle transformer, and he does have a kickstand. But even with the kickstand, he like rolls kind of okay. He comes with this nice weapon here, which is his like classic sort of like cross axe weapon, and this has some pretty neat functionality as well, because in terms of storing this in alt mode, it does use like the 3mm clip system. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could like clip it onto the back here and call it a day. But how it's intended to work is actually to integrate into the alt mode, where these pieces are all actually geared. So if you push one, they'll all gear together and then turn into a circle, which is pretty cool. And then you take this whole section and fold it up like that. And then you use the 3mm clip, and it will clip on right in there. So you can just clip it into the wheel section here, which can be kind of annoying, honestly, because the clip's so deep in. And then just line up the axe itself with the wheel, and it actually becomes a little exhaust pipe for its vehicle mode. And I think that is super cool, and I love the sort of like integrated weapon storage there. So yeah, I quite like his alt mode. He's got his rub sign Autobot logo on the top here, obviously. Let's see if I can get it to work. It's a little bit cold in here. It's coming. There we go. So you can see that works there. He's got a little license plate in the back here, which I think is kind of cool. I love the flame deco. There's like a couple, sections that would have been nice if it was picked out in paint, like the, like gas cap here. But still, I think it's a pretty successful alt mode, all things considered. And yeah, in terms of comparisons in this mode, here he is with Kingdom Sideswipe, which I guess notionally, I mean, this doesn't scale at all, but it kind of does, because, Wreck-Gar is actually supposed to turn into a giant motorcycle so that other guys can ride him. So while it looks super silly in this mode, if you take Sideswipe and put him in his robot mode, then you can actually bring this back on here and have him kind of ride. I mean, he's not like the ideal figure for it, because ideally you'd want someone with wrist swivels so that they can actually like grab onto the handlebars a little bit better. But yeah, it works with like most deluxes more or less. He does have like an integrated feature for him to actually ride himself if you have another version of this mold, which I do, but I'm going to show that off in his robot mode, because I have that one in bike mode right now, and I didn't feel like transforming both of them for the sake of the video. But yeah, so pretty good motorbike mode. And then for another comparison, here he is again. Here he is with Studio Series 86 Wreck-Gar. So you can see, I think obviously, he's got like a somewhat nicer looking bike mode, but nicer looking for an Earth bike, whereas he's definitely going for the more like G1 style boxy like space bike aesthetic there. And he's, I do like the new one better, all things considered, but there's stuff to like about this one too. I like that he's got like the spikes on the wheels and on the sides there. I do overall like the more, spacey bike mode, because I think it looks a little bit less ridiculous next to like cars and stuff like that, if it's already kind of like a weird fictional bike rather than like a very Earth looking dirt bike just being like gigantic next to cars. But I think that there's things to like about both of these guys. But yeah, to get on into the transformation, this is probably like one of the main sticking points with this guy, is that the transformation is a little bit of a pain. It's honestly way more of a pain going back into bike mode than it is into robot mode, but still worth mentioning there. But first thing we want to do, and honestly, you can kind of do this later. You don't necessarily have to take the weapon off now. And in fact, it's a little bit easier to take off later. But yeah, first thing we can do is just take the whole section with the back wheel, and you have a bit more clearance for this if you take the weapon off, but it's not too bad. Basically, you just have to untab it from that tab there, and then flip it around like this and tab it into the side of the leg. And then take this whole section. That these bits up here that are interlocked are actually the the outward bits are the toes for one of the legs, which is kind of cool. So you just unclip that and then fold out the whole leg there, and then rotate it forward, and then you can kind of spread out the foot and the heel there. And there's one of his legs, and then the other one just untabs from the wheels here and double hinges out like this. And then there's kind of an automorph gimmick in terms of like folding up the like main section here. On my other version of this guy, the like scrap heap version, doing that, and also on Wreck-Gar too, just kind of cracked one of these little hinges here, which I've glued back together. So I try to move these independently and then do that, because I think it just puts a little bit too much pressure on these very tiny little bits here. You can see they've actually, I didn't even know that, cracked on both sides there, and I've glued them back in. It's been a while since that happened, because it hasn't caused any issues since I just kind of, there used to be like little nubs on here that like helped it lock in, but it's kind of unnecessary, so I just like shaved those off just to make these pieces move a little bit easier. So you just fold those in, then you fold up the whole leg like that, and then you can take the front fender section here and rotate it around so he's got symmetrical feet. And then you take both of these sections in the hips here, and they'll both just click into place to make his legs, and then you rotate his body 90 degrees, and then untab these sections from each other and fold them around like this. It is like a painted silver piece tabbing into sections, but honestly, I've had it for a while and it doesn't, really seem to have like chipped that much off. Granted, it's not a super tight tabbing connection, but it seems to be okay. And then the arms here are just tabbed into the side, and then you can rotate them down on the ball joint and then rotate the hand around and do that on both sides here. And we can put away his kickstand there. And then on this side here, you can kind of like, just to sort of like reorient it, you can kind of untab the wheel here from this spoke, and then you can kind of rotate it down. It's on a ball joint, and just have it kind of like rest in front of his elbow. It doesn't like re-tab into place or anything. There is like a little nub on his elbow as kind of like a soft locking point, but it doesn't really lock in. It's just kind of like a place for it to rest. And then his head here, you just kind of fold up from the inside of the body, and there we have Reveal the Shield Wreck-Gar in his robot mode. And yeah, I quite like the way this guy's robot mode looks. Obviously, he's, a lot skinnier than like the G1 design, and not all the stuff is in exactly the same place, but I do really appreciate how they managed to like get both of the wheels asymmetrically on his, arm and leg there, without actually removing them, like the new one does, which, I don't really mind on the new one for the sake of G1 accuracy, but I do think it's neat how he manages to do that without removing them. In terms of his weapon here, you can obviously untab that, and if you want to store it here, it can store just there, fine, but it does also have another place to store. Yeah, sometimes it comes off the ball joint too, which is a little annoying, but it's not too bad. So you can just fold that open again. Now, one of the things about this figure that is kind of a pain is that he's got this little thing here, which honestly doesn't totally need to have been there. It's just like a little bit of sculpting detail. So if you want him to like actually hold this here, you do have to kind of like clip it into his hand, which feels a little bit scary, and he has developed like stress marks like on the inside of his palm here, and there have been reports of this piece snapping. So I usually just like slide it into his hand and have him hold it way at the end here, which definitely looks a little sillier but is way safer for the figure. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, a legitimate complaint about this guy, is that he can't hold his weapon in a more natural pose without kind of risking breaking him. But honestly, I don't totally mind the way that looks either. But if you want to store this, you can store it back on the leg. Also, he does have a clip point on his back, so you can just kind of clip it on there and then have him have it like slung over his back, which is kind of cool. But usually I just display it with him holding it, because I always like Wreck-Gar holding his weapon. But also, I don't know if this is an intended feature or not, but you can definitely take this piece and like unclip it from the ball joint, and just like the shaping of the spoke here does kind of fit like the 5mm port there. So you can actually like rotate it in his hand and give him a separate like wheel weapon here, which is what I have my like my version of Scrap Heap hold, just so they've got like slightly different weapons, which is kind of cool. Again, I don't know if it was intended, but the way you rotate it in there and the fact that like this is a little bit, thinner because of the like threading than like the main, excuse me, main section there does mean that he does hold that a little bit better without risk of it breaking. But yeah, in terms of articulation, the head is on a ball joint, so it can rotate around, look up and down. He also does have this like transformation hinge to like fold his head up. He's got like soft plastic, like, facial hair that kind of like hangs off of his face. So you do want to be a little bit careful with that, like, and not just like rest it against the section here. You want to like pull this section back and make sure that it actually sits on the inside when you're rotating his head around. So you do kind of want to be like cognizant of that. He does have that thing that they're doing a lot at the time of like having the clear plastic for the light piping, but also having painted eyes, which, I don't really mind for him. He does like have like the clear kind of makes sense on the top of Wreck-Gar's head anyway. He does have sculpted little like I don't know, like similar to the Studio Series version, has like little speed dials and stuff sculpted into the back of his head, which is kind of cool. His shoulders are on ball joints, which can rotate around and go out to the side. He does also have these transformation joints, which you can use like a little bit as like a backwards butterfly tilt before it starts to look ridiculous. But honestly, that just kind of happens naturally because they don't tab into place super well. He's got a bicep swivel, a very deep elbow bend because of how it folds up for transformation. He's got I think it's a ball joint at the waist because he gets a little bit of like wiggle back and forth in addition to the rotation. Universal joints at the hips, which can go forward and back and out to the side about that far. He's got a thigh swivel. On this knee, his knee is technically like down here, which is a little bit weird. And also it's way tighter than this joint, which is the separate double hinge joint. So that knee is a little bit annoying, whereas this one gets pretty much like a full bend, just because of, where the knee is placed properly. Like if you actually fold down the knees, like, yeah, it's generally proportional, but there's some like weirdness going on there. But yeah, this one can also fold up pretty much all the way too. It's just like, it's a little bit more annoying to maneuver, whereas this one's just like a simple hinge. And then both of his feet are on ball joints that are also on a hinge, so they can actually fold pretty decently forward and back, and they get a little bit of ankle tilt out to the side just like due to the range of the ball joint, but not like a ton. But he does have kind of like thin feet, so it's not like too big of an issue. But yeah, and then obviously rotation there if you want it. So yeah, a pretty decent articulation. Definitely some things are a little bit clunky by today's standards, but nothing too terrible. And yeah, to get onto comparisons in this mode, here he is again with side swipes. You can see pretty much an average size deluxe there, but a little bit taller than he is. Here he is again with Studio Series 86 Wreck-Gar. So you can see he's obviously much, much bigger since he's a Voyager. But I think that the two of them look, kind of cool together. Again, he's going for much more of like a stylized look, whereas he's going for much more just like G1 screen accurate, which it is probably the aesthetic I prefer at the end of the day, but I do appreciate what this guy has going on. It is also worth noting that like he definitely goes for much more of like a brown color scheme rather than like the reds and oranges of like the original. I mean, he's got some oranges, but he's definitely steering more on that like warmer tone, whereas he's mostly like the red, and then he's mostly the brown, but whichever you prefer. And then lastly, here he is with himself eventually, essentially in the form of, I believe this was Scrap Heap, maybe Scrap Yard, I can't totally remember, but yeah, you can see I ended up losing the handlebars on this one because of that same thing. That's another thing you want to keep an eye out for this figure, is that you should rotate these in so that they're kind of safe rather than letting that automorph gimmick work. But I forget what line this guy was introduced in. I think he was just like a regular Generations figure that was released maybe the same year or the year after as Wreck-Gar, just to kind of build out the Junkions. He was the only one we ever got, but yeah, he's a fun figure in and of himself, but obviously doesn't really totally fit with the whole Junkion aesthetic. He's going for this like maroon color scheme here, but he's a neat version of this mold too. But I'm bringing him on to show that he does actually have, and so does Wreck-Gar on his like seat, has like these clip points which can actually clip into the bottom of the waist here, so you can actually like have him locked on and riding the other vehicle mode, which is pretty cool. Which is definitely something I wish the Studio Series version did. Like they have like a loose tab in there just as like a place for like the butt to actually sit, but it doesn't really lock anything in place. And then because he's got that wrist swivel, you can rotate his arms pretty easily to actually get him holding on to the handlebars there, or handlebar in this case. But he's got his weapon to hold in the other hand anyway, so who cares? But yeah, no, I always thought that the way that these two, well, these one really, because it's all from the same mold, integrated like with himself to be able to like actually solidly clip on to his own vehicle mode. I always thought that was really cool, and something that the Studio Series version is a little bit lacking on, unfortunately. But I do understand the complaints that people have with this figure generally. Like, he's got some kind of fiddly, parts to his transformation, especially going back into vehicle mode. He's got some parts that are a little bit too prone to breaking, like, his hands there with the stress marks and these bits here. But he's definitely like a more stylized aesthetic than the G1. If you're looking for like a G1 accurate Wreck-Gar, obviously the Studio Series version is much better. But I've always really liked his design. I like his head sculpt. I like the, like it wasn't like weirdly out of place for them to have these stylized designs at the time. And there's plenty of other generations figures that people still, hold in pretty high regards from the same era. So it's like, I don't really think that counts as a knock against him, that he's not super G1 accurate, because like hardly any of the figures back then were super G1 accurate. But yeah, no, I just really like his vibe. He's definitely got some bits to look out for, but overall, I think he's a pretty decent figure and gets a little bit more flack than he's owed. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to him. If you enjoy my videos, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I do reviews every Tuesday and Thursday, and without further ado, here we have Transformers Reveal the Shield Wreck-Gar.